the thing is, what we are studying is pure psychology. When we study psychology, the terminology is too big and it requires many years to understand what is mind, but even then we don't have a clear-cut definition of mind. Here is a simplified version of psychology. These are what? The wasteful material of mind. This is what? The distraction of mind. So just think of anything as a distracted state of mind. You cannot add the 10th in the chart, because whatever you say, the distraction of mind will fall under these 9 categories. We move ahead. So now we know that the perfection in action is missing, because these are the symptoms in my life. I know that the effortlessness, concentration is missing. These are the symptoms of my life. That means for sure I know that understanding is missing. When understanding is missing, understanding in Sanskrit is known as Vidya. Vidya means understanding. If understanding is missing, what exists is misunderstanding. Misunderstanding is avidya. So avidya is ignorance. Ignorance about many things. I'm ignorant about my own true nature, I'm ignorant about my potential, I'm ignorant about what are the things happening around me, and it seems like I'm lost. And on top, all these distractions, they're so heavy, they're influencing me heavily, and it seems like hard for me to break my shackles. I'm trapped. This avidya leads to asmita. Asmita is I-ness, ego. If you need to define what is ego, what is it? An idea of me. Is it a problem?
Yes. Most of it, so often it is.
I don't see it as a problem. It's just a term. It's just a term. So we need to define it. So what is the difference between ego and the self? If I ask you to define ego in terms of self, how would you say? Lost identification of the self. Nicely said. I would say it uneducated self. And I was very harsh when I was talking about education. So the education what we have nowadays, we call it education, but it brings in what? It brings ego in. So the more educated you are, your ego is way big. Way big. That means you have big conflicts actually, because the big ego is going to conflict with the natural order heavily. So think of it that this is a balloon. What is inside the balloon? Air, no confusion. What is outside? Air. And what is this? A membrane, which is not allowing the union of this air inside and the air outside. But we all know that the air outside is always applying a pressure upon this membrane, and the air inside always wants to break free. The air inside always wants to break free, and the air outside always applying a pressure to break this membrane. What is this membrane? In this case, what we are discussing, this membrane is our ego. Inside is individual consciousness, and outside is universal consciousness. So individual consciousness always willing to meet the universal consciousness. Universal consciousness always helping, always willing to help the individual consciousness to break free this ego. But what do we do with our education system nowadays? We coat it actually. We make it stronger and stronger and stronger. So the education what we have in the name of modern education, it takes us away from enlightenment. It takes us away from self-realization, because I just quote it. But if you make it stronger, what happens? Action equals to reaction. We all have studied this, that action equals to reaction. So if you make it stronger, the pressure applied upon this membrane, they're also becoming bigger. Because ultimately the natural order needs to break this membrane. If not today, tomorrow, if not tomorrow, day after tomorrow. Ultimately, the natural order is going to break this ego. Okay. Anytime you think of a state of cancer in a human organism? What is it? The natural order of the body is finding it hard to penetrate. So it looks like the ego is the cancer in the natural order. And this process, when these forces are applied upon the ego, they're actually the immune system of the natural order. And here comes the time that these forces are going to win. And the ego is going to get thrashed. So that means what I'm trying to say here, doesn't matter if you want it or not, enlightenment is inevitable to you. Inevitable to you. You cannot stop it. Evolution is inevitable, you cannot stop it. Doesn't matter if you want it or not, evolution is happening. Either by a conscious choice or involuntarily, it depends. So if you go through the process of evolution consciously with some voluntary choices, it's peaceful journey. But what is the struggle of human life? Nature wants you to evolve, but you're resisting the evolution. That's its human struggle. And then if I ask you to define self in terms of ego, because we went on defining ego in terms of the self. So is there a possibility for us to define self in terms of ego? So self is what? Is actually educated ego. So ego as a term, it's not a problem. The only thing is either it is uneducated or educated. So we need to send our ego to the school. We need to send our ego to the school. Once it's educated, because ultimately what is self-realization? It's all about the process of studying the self. Once you have studied the self, that means you have educated yourself about yourself.